A lion doesn't growl before it strikes. And the strongest man doesn't speak to be feared. Some people try to intimidate with noise, threats, volume, emotion. But true power isn't loud. It's quiet, unreadable, controlled. And that's exactly why it's terrifying. Because what you can't predict, you can't control. And what you can't control, you fear. In this world, the most feared man isn't the one who talks the most. It's the one who says nothing yet still controls the room. The one whose silence doesn't say, "I don't care, but I see everything, and I don't need to react." That's the kind of presence we're going to forge today. Not with tricks, not with words, but with 6 internal states drawn from ancient Stoic philosophy, each one designed to make your enemies second-guess your every move. They won't know what you'll do. They won't understand who you are. And that is exactly why they'll fear you. Let's begin. They expected a reaction, a flinch, an outburst. Instead, you gave them silence. And that's when everything changed. You see, most people fight back. It's instinct. Someone insults them, they defend. Someone threatens them, they explain. Someone provokes, they erupt. But that's not strength. That's control by someone else's hands. When your enemy gets to choose your emotions, they've already won, because it means they own your peace. And when you lash out, when you defend, you're telling them, you got inside. That's exactly what they wanted. But imagine this instead. You don't flinch. You don't speak. You don't blink. You just look back, calm, composed, unreadable. Suddenly, they don't know what's coming next. Suddenly, they're the ones who feel exposed. That's the terrifying part, not the noise, but the silence. Because in silence, you force your enemies to face their own weakness. You hold up a mirror and make them sit in it. They wanted chaos, you gave them stillness. They wanted a show, you gave them a void. And the void never lies. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And when you react with nothing, with sheer, focused control, you're not being weak. You're proving you've already won the fight within. I knew a man once quiet, average-looking, never raised his voice. One day in a boardroom, a colleague tried to humiliate him in front of everyone, called him obsolete, mocked his ideas. The man didn't argue, didn't even acknowledge it. He just looked at the attacker and asked, "Are you finished?" Then turned his eyes back to the spreadsheet and kept working. The room, dead quiet. The attacker shrunk. That silence didn't say, "I'm weak." It said, "You don't move me. You don't get to decide who I am." And that broke the enemy more than any comeback ever could. The man who can't be rattled, can't be touched, the man who doesn't need to prove anything, becomes the most feared presence in the room. So train your stillness, master your pause, let the storm rage and stay unmoved. Because in a world that feeds on reaction, your refusal to respond becomes the most terrifying move of all. There is a kind of presence that doesn't require permission. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't announce itself with volume, charisma, or theatrics. It just is calm, grounded, unshakable, and that alone makes it intimidating. Because most people are noise. They fill the air with nervous energy, talking too much, moving too fast, trying too hard. They need attention like oxygen. They need validation like water. They try to dominate space without realizing that true power never needs to dominate. It simply takes up space without apology because it's earned, not performed. There's something deeply unsettling about a man who doesn't flinch, who doesn't need to explain himself, who doesn't chase smiles or seek approval. He just stands there alert, but still, present but untouchable. And in that stillness, the room begins to shift. People lower their voices around him. They speak more carefully. They glance at him before finishing their sentence, not because he demands it, but because his energy quietly enforces it. That is power. Not the kind that shouts, not the kind that demands, but the kind that radiates from within, built through discipline, clarity, and restraint. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And the man who carries unshakable presence doesn't just ignore his enemies. He rises so far above them that they no longer know how to reach him. That's why they fear him. I once knew a man named Elias. He wasn't particularly tall. He didn't dress flashy. He rarely smiled. But when he entered a room, people noticed, not because he tried, but because he didn't. He walked slowly, spoke only when needed, held eye contact just long enough to make people shift in their chairs. And every movement, every word, every silence felt deliberate. Even when he said nothing, you felt like something important had just been said. He worked in a high-stakes industry where ego ran rampant. Meetings were loud. People argued to prove intelligence, but Elias, he stayed quiet. He waited until everyone had exhausted themselves, then asked one question, usually no more than a sentence, and suddenly the entire room shifted from noise to precision. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he carried himself. There were no wasted movements, no unnecessary emotion. He was a reminder that, in a world of reaction, stillness is a threat. People began to fear his silence, because it was unreadable, because it meant he was watching, calculating, choosing his moment. And the ones who fear you the most are never the ones who yell, but the ones who can't predict what you'll do next. That is what unshakable presence does. It keeps your enemies off balance. It forces manipulators to step lightly. It makes even the loudest voices lower themselves in your silence. So how do you build it? You stop performing. You stop chasing attention. You slow your breath. Straighten your spine. You observe more than you speak. And you practice doing nothing until your stillness becomes the loudest thing in the room. Because a man who is deeply rooted in purpose, in clarity, in restraint, doesn't need to move fast. He makes the world slow down to meet him. And when that happens, you no longer need to assert your power. You become it. There's a reason people insult you. It's not always because they hate you sometimes. It's because they're afraid of you, afraid of what you represent, afraid of your progress, your calm, your refusal to play by their emotional rules. So they attack, not with fists, but with words, and not to win, but to provoke. Because here's the truth. Insults aren't about truth, they're about control. They want to disrupt your balance. They want to see if they can bend your peace. They want to feel powerful by making you react. But the moment you respond, you've given them what they came for. It doesn't matter how intelligent your comeback is. It doesn't matter how justified your anger feels. If your peace was stolen even for a second, they won. But when you don't flinch, when you don't explain, when you don't even acknowledge the insult, it echoes louder in their own head than it ever could in yours. Because silence in the face of attack isn't weakness, it's a verdict, a cold, calm declaration that says, "You're not worth my response." And nothing is more humiliating than being ignored by someone you tried to hurt. I knew a woman once. Her name was Clara. She worked in a toxic corporate environment where gossip and passive aggression were the currency of status. There was one co-worker, in particular, bitter, petty, and envious, who made it her mission to tear Clara down. The insults were subtle at first. Backhanded compliments. Whispers just loud enough to hear. Sarcasm in meetings. Framed as just a joke. But Clara, she never took the bait. Not once. She smiled gently, took her notes, focused on the work, and walked out of every room with the same unshaken calm she walked in with. Over time, something strange happened. The attacker started getting louder, meaner, more desperate, to provoke a reaction. But the louder she got, the smaller she seemed, until one day, people just stopped laughing, stopped listening, because when you keep punching at a wall that doesn't move, you start to look ridiculous. Clara didn't fight back. She didn't expose her enemy. She simply stood so still that the other woman fell by her own momentum. That's what Stoicism teaches. Let fools reveal themselves. Let the insult fall flat against your silence. Let the attacker crumble under the weight of their own insecurity. Epictetus wrote, "If someone speaks ill of you, instead of defending yourself, say, 'He obviously doesn't know me very well.'" In other words, never give your enemy the satisfaction of explanation. Don't give them your outrage. Don't give them your clarity. Give them your silence. Because the one who doesn't defend himself is either defeated or so far above the fight that the battle never reached him in the first place. Be the latter. Let your silence say everything. Let your dignity become the thing they can't tear down. And the next time someone insults you, smile. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it didn't reach where it mattered. People fear what they can't predict. They may not admit it. But the moment you become unreadable, you become dangerous. Because control begins with information. Your fears, your ambitions, your routines, your weaknesses, they're all leverage in the wrong hands. And the more you speak, the more you explain, the more they listen, not to understand you, but to map you, to know how to move you, shake you, play you. But when you withhold, when you move without announcement, without justification, you become a problem they can't solve, a question they can't answer, a storm they can't forecast. And that is terrifying. You don't need to lie. You don't need to deceive. You simply need to leave space between who you are and what they know. The Stoics knew this. They didn't live loudly. They didn't project their desires into the world. They moved with purpose, not publicity. They shared what was necessary, but never everything. Because everything revealed is everything exploitable, Seneca wrote. It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence. And sometimes, silence is not just wisdom, it's defense. I once met a man named Caleb, soft-spoken, disciplined, never overshared. When people asked him personal questions, he'd smile, deflect with something light, then redirect, not cold, not evasive, just composed. Some called him mysterious, others called him arrogant. But over time, those same people started to respect him. Why? Because they couldn't figure him out. They didn't know what made him angry, what made him insecure, or what he truly wanted. So they couldn't use it against him. And when pressure came, when workplace drama exploded, when rumors flew, Caleb remained untouchable. Because no one had a grip on his emotional levers, no one had seen the blueprint. He moved like a shadow, and they feared what he might do next, simply because they didn't know what he was capable of. That's the power of being unreadable. The enemy can't break what he can't reach, and he can't reach what he doesn't understand. Want to build that kind of armor? Then stop narrating your every move. Stop announcing your every goal. Stop giving people access to every chamber of your mind. Let them guess. Let them wonder. Let them assume and be wrong. Because a man who keeps something to himself isn't hiding weakness, he's preserving power. And the world has no weapon for a man who walks in silence, holds his truth like a sword, and reveals only what the moment demands. Let them study you. Let them try to decode your silence. Let them burn their energy trying to predict a pattern that doesn't exist outside your own will. In a world obsessed with talking, doing becomes rare and terrifying. We live in an age where everyone's announcing something, their next move, their latest plan, their goals, routines, transformations, and upgrades. They talk about what they'll do before they've done it. And they mistake attention for progress. But here's the truth. The more you talk, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to stop. But a man who acts in silence, who builds without broadcasting, who plans without promising, he becomes unstoppable because by the time the world reacts, it's already too late. The Stoics weren't interested in speeches. They didn't post daily affirmations or shout their virtue. They lived it quietly, ruthlessly, with discipline. They understood that action without noise is the clearest form of self-respect. Epictetus said it best. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Let the others explain. Let them sell the dream. Let them chase applause for the idea of success while you chase the thing itself. I once knew a woman named Samira, brilliant, driven, but quiet almost to the point of invisibility, while others at her firm bragged about new projects, future promotions, and side hustles. Samira kept her head down and worked. No one noticed her at first. They thought she was soft, passive, even forgettable. Until one day, her name came up as the one person in the company who had built a system that saved millions. Suddenly, they all turned to look. But by then, she was already gone. promoted, transferred, elevated to a level they never saw coming because they were too busy talking. That's what silent action does. It shifts power without warning. It creates results that don't need to be explained, and it leaves your enemies stunned, not because they didn't see you coming, but because they forgot to take you seriously until it was far too late. Want to cultivate that power, then shut the door. Do the work. Let your effort echo in silence. Don't warn people. Don't predict your greatness. Don't overpromise. Just disappear into action and reappear with results. Because when you act with no warning, you don't just avoid resistance, you create fear. Not the fear of what you said you'd do, but the fear of what you might do next. And that silence, that tension, that mystery, it becomes louder than any word you could have spoken. There's something deeply unsettling about a person who doesn't need approval. In a world built on likes, applause, and social calibration, most people learn to bend, to edit themselves, to shrink their voice just enough to stay likable. They laugh when they don't feel like it. They nod when they disagree. They downplay their truth, all to avoid friction. And that's why the one who doesn't do it, the one who walks in exactly as he is, becomes a threat. Not because he's cruel, not because he's confrontational, but because he reminds everyone else of just how much they've compromised. Authenticity is confronting, especially to the inauthentic. When you stop trying to fit in, you do more than free yourself. You make people uncomfortable, not by attacking them, but by reflecting something they abandoned long ago, the courage to be real. I once knew a man named Jace. He wasn't loud. He wasn't edgy. But he had a way of making people uneasy without ever trying to. He spoke clearly, but never adjusted his tone to win people over. He didn't follow trends. He wore what he liked, said what he meant. And when others gossiped, he stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of principle. Some people avoided him. They'd say, "He's intense," or "He thinks he's better than everyone." But deep down, what they felt was pressure, not from him, but from their own inability to do what he was doing. He was simply himself, unapologetically, consistently, and that was more radical than any rebellion. That's the paradox of authenticity. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just stands there calmly and forces others to examine their mask. The Stoics believed in living according to your nature, not the world's expectations, not the crowd's mood, just virtue, integrity, alignment, even if it makes you the odd one out. Especially then. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to match the energy of the room. You don't even need to be understood. You just need to be real." And in a world built on performance, being real becomes terrifying. Want to become that kind of force? Then stop apologizing for who you are. Stop watering yourself down to stay digestible. Stop hiding your edge, your pace, your clarity to make others comfortable. Speak less. Mean more. Say no when it's a no. Walk away when it's over. And never apologize for the standard you hold, as long as you're holding it for yourself first. Because when you finally become the version of you that doesn't flinch, doesn't adapt for attention, and doesn't perform for applause, you don't just walk in peace, You walk with pressure, the silent kind that makes weaker men adjust their masks before you even look at them. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't threaten. You didn't beg for respect. And yet, they hesitated. They second-guessed. They feared what you might do because you gave them nothing to read and everything to feel. You didn't fight the enemy. You became the kind of man who makes enemies uncomfortable by simply existing. No chaos, no drama, just silence forged in self-mastery. Because the most feared man in the room is not the one who speaks. It's the one who doesn't need to. So don't shout. Don't explain. Don't rush to be seen. Let your stillness speak. Let your boundaries echo. Let your silence do the damage they never saw coming. And when they finally understand who you are, you'll already be gone quiet, focused, and untouchable. If this spoke to something deep in you, if you felt the shift toward becoming that silent force, drop a comment. I no longer explain. I just move. And subscribe. Not because we asked, but because you're done being average. Welcome to the world of still power. Welcome to Think Stoic 101.